Hello health champions! Today I want to share with you the top 10 foods to avoid if you want to live a long and healthy life. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Very often we hear that you shouldn't eat this or you shouldn't eat that, and we read these long lists, but we may not understand why these foods are good or bad. So today we're going to give you the list, but we're also going to explain each item. So make sure that you really pay attention to each one so that you understand why it is a good idea to avoid it. Also, I'm never going to tell you that you shouldn't eat this or that, but if you understand the consequence, then you will want to avoid those foods in order to have the best possible health. And if you notice on the board, I have foods in quotation marks. That's because some people think that just because it's customary to put something in the mouth and swallow that, that's called food. That we have all these habits of eating things we think are food, but they're not really food. So let's first talk about what food is. And food is something that provides fuel and nutrients, something that has building blocks that you can use to build new tissue, and something that contains catalysts like vitamins and minerals and enzymes to help your body turn the fuel into energy and to help turn the building blocks into tissue. That's what whole food is. Whole food has all those different things. But when we process food, a lot of times we destroy it. We make it non-food, right? So health is the ability to turn the fuel and the building blocks and the catalysts into energy and tissue, and to use this energy to coordinate the function in the body with signals. So the brain receives about 1 billion bits of information every second. It comes from the body, from your intestines, from your tissues, from your joints, from your muscles, and it comes from the environment, the temperature, the air pressure, gravity. All those things generate signals that your body has to use energy to process and regulate. And that is what health is, the ability to manage, to produce and manage signals. The better that works, the healthier you are. The sooner you can return to homeostasis or balance, the healthier you are. A poison is something that interferes with the regulation of signals, either with the production of energy or with the transport and regulation of signals. So if the body is trying to send a signal someplace and there's a poison, then that signal is either blocked or distorted or somehow interfered with. All right? So we're going to keep these in mind as we talk about these foods and so-called foods so that we understand what it does and if it's something that we want to eat or not. So we'll take this list in reverse order, and we're going to start with number 10, the 10th worst, and we're going to work our way down to the absolute worst. So the first thing that I want to avoid, or the 10th thing, would be any non-fat product, anything labeled non-fat, low-fat, reduced fat, whether it's yogurt or milk or some other sour cream, non-fat sour cream. I mean, it's a contradiction in terms. Mayonnaise, salad dressings, peanut butter, all these things that naturally have some fat in them, if they're labeled as low-fat or non-fat or reduced fat, that means they've taken something out. The food was complete, the food was whole, but they took stuff out because they're afraid of fat. And the fat provided flavor and texture. It had the mouthfeel, the richness, the satisfying properties. And when they take those out, then we lose that satiating property of the food, and they typically have to put in sugar and artificial flavors and artificial stabilizers and all these different chemicals to try to give it the same texture and flavor and feel that the product originally had. So it's usually a destroyed food. And the fat was there for a reason in the beginning. If nature put the fat there, then it was a good fat. So unprocessed foods have good quality fats, and when we take those out, like healthy oils in the salad dressings or in mayonnaise, those fats are good, but when we remove them and put something else in, it becomes just a chemical concoction. So these would be something that I would never eat if I had the choice. Number 9 on the list is deli meats. And this is one of those things that could be good or it could be bad. So you have to understand why it would or wouldn't. So if they take a good healthy meat and they don't add a bunch of chemicals and they don't use a bunch of nitrites, especially if the animal was organically raised and raised on natural food, if it was sustainably and raised in good conscience, then that can be an excellent product. But if they add a bunch of sugar and nitrites and artificial flavors and things that give it a certain texture and preservatives, now it's not a good food anymore. Now they've added as much poison and foreign stuff as they've had meat in there. And especially things like hot dogs. Now, who knows what are in those things? And sometimes there is so little meat in there that there's more other stuff. So I was talking to a friend recently and he said that, you know, hot dogs sometimes have like 10-20% meat in them, and back where I come from, they call that bread. So we want to know that there are good ones and bad ones. So avoid the bad ones like the plague, but the good ones can actually be excellent snacks. Number 8 on the list is GMOs, genetically modified organisms and modified plants. So the primary ones to avoid are corn and soy and sugar beets. There are others, and you want to sort of pay attention and find things that are non-GMO, that are labeled non-GMO. And if there are certain vegetables that you eat on a regular basis, like maybe eggplant and squash, you want to try to learn which ones would be genetically modified, and you want to get organic whenever you can out of those things that could be genetically modified, because technically the organic is supposed to be guaranteed not to be genetically modified. I don't know if you can trust that 100%, but you're going to be a whole lot safer that way. And genetically modified organisms, those are where we're sort of playing genetic roulette. That these things can combine with other DNA, they can combine with bacterial strains in your gut flora and create whole new species. They can produce things, they can produce pesticides and alcohol and different things that you really don't want in your body. These are organisms, these are species that we never had on the planet, so you really don't want to put them in your body. The 7th thing, or the 7th category to avoid, are commercial oils, vegetable oils, and anything deep fried. So vegetable oils, those are things that aren't really vegetable oils. They're seed oils and bean oils like canola and safflower and corn oil, etc. Soybean oil. And these are very sensitive. They're polyunsaturated and monounsaturated, mostly polyunsaturated. That means they're very sensitive to heat and light and oxygen. So they oxidize, they go rancid very quickly. So in order to make them shelf stable, they process them very, very harshly. So these are chemically enhanced, chemically produced concoctions. They're so far from food that you don't ever want to touch them. The other thing they have is they're very high in omega-6s, and these omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. So when they deep fry things, then they can't have something that's very sensitive to heat and oxygen and light, because then it would go rancid and toxic even faster. So a lot of these frying oils are saturated or hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated, which makes them trans fats. So a lot of these commercial oils, if you go out to eat, you really want to avoid deep fried food, period. Okay? If you ever eat anything deep fried, it should be made at home in butter or coconut oil, because those are stable, and you would only use them sparingly, and you'd only use them one time, and so forth. So anytime you go to a restaurant, you have something deep fried, that's been used over and over and over and over, so it's toxic. It's more toxic because of the heat and the repetition, but it was toxic to start with because of the hydrogenation and the fact that it was so harshly processed in the first place. So oils are not necessarily bad. Fats are not bad in general, but bad fats are really bad. So you want to stick with the natural fats like extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, butter, ghee, those things that are easy to process. If you take an olive and you squeeze it, you get oil. You don't have to use a lot of heat or a lot of chemicals to get it out. Those are the oils that are good. Number 6 on the list is white flour, modern wheat, and anything made from those things. So white flour is any whole grain flour that has been processed, that has been refined. And basically what happens when they make white flour is they often use chemicals, so it's sort of tainted, but they basically remove all the nutrients because the nutrients make it less shelf stable. The nutrients react with oxygen and heat and light, so in order to keep it on the shelf, they remove all the nutrients and they just save the starchy portion, which makes it white flour. So now it can sit there much longer, but it doesn't have any nutrients. The other problem with that is that the vast majority of all the white flour is made from modern wheat. And modern wheat is nothing like the wheat that we had on the planet thousands of years ago. So even if you could sort of argue that yes, humans had grain 10,000 years ago, and the Egyptians and agriculture and all those reasons, then those grains, those species of grain were totally different from the modern wheat. 10,000 years ago they had two grains. They had emmer and einkorn, and then along the way we got the spelt and the kamut and so forth. But there were very, very few. And then we had rye. But in the last 50 years or so, they've experimented and hybridized and manipulated, and they've gone through tens of thousands of different wheats to try to find something that had a high yield, that was resistant to weather and so forth. And their objective in making the modern wheat was not health. It was not to make it healthy. It was to increase the yield so they could feed a lot of people. And that was a noble intention, but along the way they kind of lost what wheat used to be. So it's totally, totally different. And if you want a lot of information, if you really want to solidify your understanding of why to avoid that, I recommend reading the book Wheat Belly, because it's a whole book that just talks about what they did to modern wheat and what it does to you. So then you want to avoid any kind of product made from those. Okay, I don't eat anything with that in it anymore. So any kind of breakfast cereal, and it's kind of scary if you think about how many yards in the average store is just full of cereal, and every one of them has modern wheat in it. And this is waffles and crackers and toast and all those different things. And then if it's kids' cereals, do you love your kids? Well, don't give them that, because it's the modern wheat, it's white flour, it's corn, GMO corn, and then they add sugar and artificial colors and artificial flavors, and then they sprinkle some synthetic vitamins on top. And there's nothing in there that is food. It isn't food anymore. So I would avoid everything that has to do with white flour, modern wheat, and anything made from those products. Number 5 on the list is MSG, monosodium glutamate. And now we're getting into the categories. So most of these so far, they're only either they're a lack of food because we have removed nutrients by processing. Some of them can turn a little bit poisonous with the interference with the chemicals and however they were processed. But now we're getting into the stuff that is actually poison. These are chemicals. These things have no food value. They don't provide any fuel or building blocks or catalysts. There's nothing in there that your body needs. And MSG, monosodium glutamate, it's a flavor enhancer. And how does it do that? Well, it mimics, so monosodium glutamate, glutamate is a neurotransmitter. It's something that your body uses to send signals, to transmit messages, to excite activity in the body. But when we add it from the outside, now we trick the body. So when you put it on the taste bud, it tricks the taste buds into more activity, and it tricks the brain into thinking things taste better than they are. It's like a dream come true for the processed food manufacturers, because they can trick your brain into thinking it tastes better than it does, and into thinking that you should eat more than you want to, and you can't stop because it's a drug effect. So these are called excitotoxins. And what they do, the reason it's called also the Chinese restaurant syndrome, is you stimulate your brain, you over-excite your brain. And what happens with the brain then is when you work out a muscle, then that muscle gets lactic acid and it starts burning and you get tired, you can feel it. In the brain you can't feel it, you just excite that brain cell until it's overworked and then it shuts down. And either it's just wiped out for a while or you actually killed off that brain cell. So that's why they're called excitotoxins. And that's in the Chinese restaurant syndrome. You feel good, you feel good, you feel good, and then you crash, right? That's the reason. So you want to avoid these, and this is basically 99.9% of all canned soup, of most flavored potato chips or corn chips or any snack product that has like a barbecue flavor or jalapeno flavor, anything except your basic salt flavor is going to have MSG in it. Canned soup, we said, and then also salad dressings. It's basically the thing that gives flavor to ranch dressing. Ranch dressing doesn't taste the way it does without MSG. It's extremely difficult to make a ranch dressing that tastes like ranch dressing unless you use MSG. So just be aware of that, know what it does, and avoid those. Number 4 on the list is sugar. And the only reason sugar isn't number 1 on the list is that sugar is one of those things that it's not poison. All right? It doesn't fit in the poison category. It's just a refined and highly processed food. It does provide fuel. It doesn't provide any building block or catalysts. It can be converted into energy even though it depletes the body because it doesn't have any nutrients come with it. But the dose makes the poison, all right? So sugar is the most natural molecule on the planet. Everything that is plant-based is sugar. It is glucose. It's just different forms. Trees are glucose. Grass is glucose. Fruit and vegetables are glucose. So it's not an absolute. It depends on the form it comes in, right? So it's not a poison. It's the quantity that makes it a poison. And the way that it becomes a poison is when we have things like refined white sugar and high fructose corn syrup and we put it in drinks. Because now it's way too easy to get too much. You have a sweet drink, you have a soda, you have a sweet tea, you're in the American South and it's a hot day and you start sipping on sweet iced tea and you could drink gallons of the stuff. And there's as much sugar as in soda. So it's a bottomless pit, it's a trap. Anything nectar, oftentimes they call it nectar and said made with real fruit. Well, it's a little bit of fruit and then they added synthetic chemicals and sugar. Energy drinks don't give you energy. They're stimulants. They're sugar drinks with some caffeine and with some other stimulants in there. The very popular coffee drinks now. I like Starbucks. I get black coffee, I get espresso, I get a cappuccino sometimes, but I stay far, far away from all those popular drinks, the Frappuccino and all the flavored stuff, because it's pure sugar and chemicals. They're drugs and they're addictive. So when you have these drinks, it's so easy to drink hundreds of grams of sugar every day. And now sugar is a poison. Okay? Sugar is the root of all evil for these reasons, because it's such a big part of our culture and our habits. Everywhere we look, there's sugar. So the drinks are the worst, but then of course anything that contains sugar, like candy or snacks or muffins or waffles or pancakes and syrup and so forth. Stay away from sugar. I would suggest that you count the sugar just to kind of learn how much you're consuming. And I would suggest you keep the added sugars at between 5 and 10, or 0 to 10 grams a day. Anything above that, I think, is too much, because now it very easily becomes the drug with that addictive effect, and it starts putting a burden on your liver, because your liver has to metabolize all that fructose that is in that sugar. Number 3 on the list is margarine. Margarine is a synthetic, man-made food. It is a toxic chemical, right? Everyone pretty much agrees now. Even the mainstream government guidelines, they say to limit trans fats. They finally made it mandatory to put trans fat on the food labels, because they are the only thing on that food label that is a true poison. Margarine is a manually saturated fat. They start off with a synthetic, with a highly processed plant oil. So it's harshly processed using high heat, high pressure, lots of chemicals, so they get a very toxic product, high in omega-6s. Then they make it worse. Then they shoot at high speed and high pressure and high temperature. They bombard this with hydrogens, with protons. And now they solidify, they turn that polyunsaturated oil into a partially saturated. So they solidify it, and in doing that, they create a molecule that doesn't exist in nature. And when you eat this, it is very poorly broken down by the body. It's very poorly metabolized. And you use fats in the body for fuel, but you also use them for cell membranes. And the structure of these fatty acids determine the properties of your cell membranes. And your cell membranes, those are the barriers that decide the inside and outside of the cell. They determine what is supposed to come in and what's supposed to be stopped. So they make decisions. The cells, the membrane is the true brain of the body. Okay, that's where decisions are made. It's like a transistor, it's a semiconductor. And if you have margarine in your body that's not broken down, and the body is deficient in these proper essential fatty acids, it's going to start substituting whatever fat it has, and it's going to start putting margarine. It's going to start putting trans fats into the cell membrane, and you disrupt and you destroy and you alter the signaling properties of that membrane. And this has been implicated in every kind of disease, including cancer, right? You distort the body's normal responses in so many different ways. So margarine is way, way, way up there of toxins. And sadly, when they did most of the studies on heart disease, and they found out, they decided that heart disease was caused by fat, then that was at a time when everybody was eating almost exclusively margarine. All right? That's the biggest reason that fat got a bad rap, was that that's what people were eating at the time, and they saw that these people, oh, they're eating so much fat. Well, sure, they ate some animal fats, but they didn't eat butter, they ate margarine, and that's why they got sick. The second worst food, in my opinion, is the category of donuts, cake and frosting, right? Because these combine most of the worst of the properties of all of these so-called foods, non-foods above here. So donuts are deep fried. They use terrible oil. They have trans fats, partially hydrogenated fats. They have sugar, modern wheat. So it's combining all these different things. And if they're really, really bad, now they're going to have all these other chemicals and flavors and colors and dough conditioners with it as well. So I don't think you could possibly design a worse food with less nutrients and more bad effects on your physiology than donuts. And now cake, the only difference is cake isn't deep fried, but it's still modern wheat and it's still all the sugar. And typically cake has some frosting with it, and the frosting is made with shortening, which is a partially hydrogenated vegetable fat. So it's really like just another version of margarine, but it's worse. So cake and frosting and donuts, they sort of combine all the worst of the really bad stuff of any of these above. So if you have a party, if there's a celebration somewhere and you just feel, hey, I gotta have some cake, then look up some recipes online. Look for some keto cake. Look for some paleo cakes, all right? You can make very, very tasty desserts on natural foods without using any of the bad fats, without using any processed sugar, and you can make it healthy. It's not something that you still want to eat. Don't turn it into a staple. Don't make it another food group. But if you have it for the occasional celebration, then you can have it and not feel bad about it. And the number one thing that you want to avoid if you want to stay healthy is artificial sweetener. It made number one worst on my list because it is not a food, it is not a nutrient, it is a poison. It's a neurotoxin. All of them are. Some of them are a little bit worse than others. So I would say that aspartame is by far the worst, and then we have sucralose second, known as Splenda. So aspartame is NutraSweet, sucralose is Splenda, saccharin is Sweet and Low, and acesulfame potassium or acesulfame K is usually not sold by itself, but it's put in combination with other things. So virtually every time that you see aspartame or sucralose, you're going to see this kind of as an add-on. And what's so bad about these things? Well, they are neurotoxins. They are chemicals. They're man-made. They have no function, no position, no place in the human body. And the reason aspartame is so terrible is it breaks down, and the breakdown products, the resulting products, are formaldehyde, also known as embalming fluid. It breaks down into methanol, wood alcohol, the stuff that you go blind, and it also breaks down into an excitotoxin, a neurotransmitter, just like the MSG. So it has a triple effect of super, super toxic, poisonous effects in the body. And there's a high number of liver toxicities and kidney failures and all sorts of autoimmune conditions that are, in my opinion, in my experience, caused by aspartame. There were more complaints to the FDA, more formal complaints to the FDA about aspartame in the 10 years following its release than the FDA had received on formal complaints in the history of the FDA. So this is a poison. The others are not much better. They're still man-made, they're still very poisonous chemicals. Sucralose is a chlorocarbon. It is chemically related to DDT and to a family of pesticides, most have which have been banned in the entire world for being carcinogenic. So stay away from artificial sweeteners and anything that contains them. So you have to be very careful. The obvious giveaway is diet sodas. So Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, Diet this and that. But also low-calorie yogurts. They will have artificial sweeteners in them. Chewing gum, it used to be that you had regular and you had unsweetened. Well, and the regular had sugar and the other one had artificial sweeteners. Well, now, guess what? Both regular and sugar-free have artificial sweeteners because it prolongs the flavor. So they put sugar and this stuff in it. So you have to look very, very carefully. There are some chewing gums on the market that don't have these. They are sweetened with sugar alcohols like xylitol, etc. And those would be much better in moderation, but the flavor you can tell because the flavor only lasts a few seconds. And of course, that's why they put this synthetic stuff in there, but don't use it because it's poison. As far as drinks, the only soda that I drink, it is a diet soda, so to speak, but it's called Zevia, and I'm not getting paid for this, but it has nothing strange in there. It's no artificial colors, no artificial flavors. It is sweetened with stevia only. So that would be the alternative. If you're trying to get off Diet Coke, then that's what I would suggest. So the reason you want to avoid all these items, all these categories of food is that they are not food. The only thing would be a deli meat if it is a high quality. If you research a little bit how it's produced and you read the ingredients and there's nothing strange in, then it can be a good snack. If not, then avoid it like the plague. It will make you sick, it will poison your body, it will shorten your life. If you enjoyed this video, then you can learn a whole lot more from that one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.